Welcome to Hacking Capitalism. This is episode 7, A New System. And my name is Todd Bonnewell. You can find out more about me at todd.bonnewell.com.
And my name is Joe Blankenship. You can find out more about me at thejoeblankenship.com.
Thanks again for joining me, Joe. We are going to push off here into a new system, but before we do, we'd just like to reiterate a few things. This is episode 7, so we've got 6 under our belt, and we have covered quite a few things up to this point. We've gone through what is hacking and current events. It couldn't be better to check out that episode to really understand what hacking is. And capitalism. What is capitalism? That was in the second episode, or third episode actually. And then we went into what is government. These are all good primers for these topics. We cover some reading material, and as we move along here, we're writing a book, and we are co-authoring it with anyone who wants to join in. Anybody who wants to join the discussion, please do at any time. We're looking for as much discourse as possible. Let's see, the next episode we covered real problems and potential solutions. And then we went into data as a resource. And in data as a resource, we covered what data is and how we can use it as a people to take the power back. So with that, Joe, would you like to kick off a new system?
Yeah, absolutely. And, just to reiterate on what you talked about, it's the first parts of this book have been really just exploring exactly what people have been butting their heads up against in recent history, from, the modern era of industrialism to now the allegedly postmodern era, looking at what we have to deal with today so that we can then start building for something tomorrow that is better. So with a new system, we're just now getting into the meat of exactly how we're taking these pre-existing concepts that we've gone over and actually start asking the questions of what can we do in terms of creating a new system, or through hacking the existing one. How are we going to use instead of giving that power over to someone else? And obviously we have to be sensitive to what is allowed. Not everything is going to be a Western U.S. context. There are going to be people over in India and China, Southeast Asia, Russia, South and Central America, Africa. All these places have different permissions and exactly how they can go about interacting with the system and manipulating it for their advantage. So that brings them around to, what is exactly available for them to do that? What resources do they have, either raw or developed or technological or social, that they can use to develop that? And ultimately, what level of education, what exposure do they have to these things to make it conceivable, to make this thing that they perceive as disempowering and able to find something and conceptualize something that is better for them, that actually gives them more power, even at a local scale, something that gives them something to hold on to, something that helps them feel that their value has been preserved, which is extremely important.
Yeah, I think those are great points, Joe. I mean, it really is about handing the power back to the individual, and we believe that people want to do the right thing, and they want things to change, and they want things to be better, and they just are lacking in an action item. They don't know what to do next. They don't know how to proceed. So we're really, I mean, as of I guess the last few episodes, the last 2 maybe, we start really getting into solutions here. So this new system is going to be fun to cover.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we were just talking about before this broadcast, about how this section is kind of representative of a lot of the stuff, with the French philosophers, Jean Baudrillard's simulacra and simulation. It's this fact that people have been dealing with this existing capitalist economic system, which is essentially just a lot of illusions piled on top of each other. So how do you get through all these representations to actual real value? And everybody from the individual to the societies that people live in have been living under this collective illusion that they're essentially disempowered through these systems. And I think a big thing that we're trying to do here with this project through Hacking Capitalism is essentially showing people that you can take this system apart, look at the internal mechanisms, and actually find new economies and new systems to operate under that will help transition safely into a newer economy. So, and I think that brings us right into our new economics. I mean,
Yeah.
and I think my three questions here were kind of the foundational concepts any economist looks at when they're asking about what an economy does. What to produce. Essentially, an economy exists to essentially exchange commodities, essentially to give one person's value to another person based on how they mutually feel about that value. So, and then that whole exchange of the commodity and the transformation of the commodity, both in terms of its solid form, its material form, its process, that all gets slapped into how it's produced. You're talking about the means of production, which are the tooling, the raw materials, the resources they use to make the thing, and then the modes of the production, which are essentially the methods by which they go about using the means to actually produce the commodity and go about exchanging it and go about processing it through this entire system, which is now a global system. There's local instances of it, but it's all part of this global infrastructure. And when you're looking from a local perspective, you feel very small in the scope of a lot of these behemoths, both economically, politically, socially. And you often ask the third question about economies, which is who gets the products? Who's consuming these things? Who's exchanging the things? Who's profiting from the things? And for the longest time, in terms of data as a resource, in terms of both problems and solutions, people have not been profiting from that value. They've been disenfranchised. They've been disconnected in terms of their labor, been disconnected in terms of their time value. They invest into stuff. Their use of fiat currencies, credit, all these things are mechanisms by which products are made profitable, but people are not seeing the profit from the product. So, and I think Todd, you had some great questions that follow that up.
Yeah, great. I mean, good points again, Joe. It's really about what the people want,
Mhm.
and you're right. We've been taken advantage of for so long that it feels normal. It feels
Mhm.
normal to take a job. It feels normal to work most of your life. It feels normal to leave your kids at daycare and go off to work. These
Yep.
things are not normal, and we've talked about. I guess I mean they are normal in society, but
Yeah.
they're not what is natural, or what people desire, and I think that's what you know that's really to me what this new system comes down to is two questions. What do you want and what do you need
Mhm.
on the front side of it to figure out the world, everybody individually. What does everybody want? What does everybody need? And then on the other side of that, what are you willing and able to do? And in that, we have then, if we can answer those questions in a way that is quantitative, and we would be able to then figure out how much labor we would need to accomplish those wants and needs collectively, wholly, not leaving anybody behind, not leaving anyone out of the system. So, and that's really important to us, is to be all inclusive, whether you want to participate or not. I see a future where you can go to a restaurant or to a eatery and sit down and eat something and walk out without paying if you can't afford to, or if you don't feel like it, or whatever. Society will pitch in that little extra bit to make sure it happens. And when we say pitching in, too often we think about money, and it's really about labor. It's about time, because as we automate things, as we automate our the drones and our delivery systems and our transportation, human jobs go away. The willing and able to do becomes unnecessary. We can just send those people home, and then they have more free time. Then they can take more work off our plates. They can
Mhm.
better society in other ways. So when we talk about a new economics and what this new system is, to me, it's, the accounting of it isn't so much dollars and cents and who owes who what and how much you stockpile. It's more about an economy of reputation and gamification, the desire to want to do the right thing, to want to help out, but just to not know how. So if there was a system you could just pull up and say, hey, I've got 5 minutes. What can I do? What kind of value can I add to society? Something new, something different, something simple, something complex. It reminds me of I don't know the specifics, but there was I think she was a secretary or an administrator over in England, that they released a game about folding proteins, and it happened to be not some
Yeah.
scientist or some physicist that was able to best fold proteins, but it was a
Yeah,
common
little
person.
kid. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and that's really what it's about. It's about finding the talents, and
Hmm.
we're not going to find the talents the way we're doing it, because we squander the talents the way we're doing it. We put people in unnatural situations, and we, through competition, we squander a lot of that value away. And by
Yep.
competition, I mean corporate competition, where you can bring a product to market, completely fail, and everything that went along with it goes down the drain as well. So all that manpower that you've purchased, everything, it's gone. And it was, and why? Because somebody said, I think I know what people want,
Hmm.
so I'm going to deliver a product or service. And then they find out, well, people didn't really want that, and we couldn't market it well enough. Rather than saying, hey, what does everybody want and need? Then we fulfill it. So there's an efficiency there that I think the current economic system we deal with
Yeah.
totally, um, you know, lets the people down in a big way.
Yeah, and that, you're absolutely right. And this is those two questions are ones that even in my own research, when I'm looking at human machine spaces and looking at automation, looking at AI, looking at machine learning, I'm constantly asking. It seems like a very philosophical question, but it has very pragmatic implementations or implications, which is the difference between necessity and desire. When does necessity is a very base layer thing. You don't need a lot of things to survive and to be happy. You don't need to like a lot of money to be happy. But there's this idea within capitalism that the more you have, the more happy you are, and that's that it ferments that kind of fear that people are, when you ask them what are you willing or able to do to move towards a better state, they're not willing to let go of that old paradigm of more is better, more equals happiness. And that's very hard inside of a Western context, especially since the Western people who have the most ability to make global change happen quick are the least able or least willing to let go of that paradigm,
Yeah.
because once you have it, you don't want to let it go. It's whether it's by peer group pressure or whether it's by just the fact that that's what and you haven't been educated in any other form of societal, socioeconomic relations or political economy or anything like that. A lot of people just don't understand those concepts because obviously, even especially in the U.S., since I'm from the U.S., social sciences education in elementary, secondary, even undergraduate college level is very sparse, if not existent at all. And it's very hard for young adults who are going out into the economy and have the ability from the day one to make real change, to make that change if they don't know what they're working inside of, how they factor into this bigger equation, which is capitalism. And once again, that brings us to our next session, which is politics. Obviously we just can't change the economy. We have to change the relationship between governments and economies. And that, this is not something that is, a classic argument from, looking at Marx's critiques of, Smith or Ricardo or Malthus or whatever. These are things that are still very recent. People are still debating Keynes versus Hayek. What distance should government have from economies? How liberal should economies be? And that requires political entities to ask three very big questions, or questions about three big areas, which are: what is the economic landscape that this type of government is interacting with? Is it a capitalist system? Which is pretty much the one that most people will be dealing with, but there are other systems out there. But the thing that bridges those things is obviously the legal framework. How are these governments, legislating and regulating economic interactions, both between economies and people, but also the economies and governments? Because a lot of places, I can't think of anyone that has a true democracy, but most places are representative democracies, republics, stuff like that. So there's a space, a divide between people and the government, and it's put there for a reason that people have chosen to engage with. But people have to be sensitive to that fact that there is a separation there, and that governments aren't, infallible. They have weaknesses. We see them in every government around the world. That direct connection, the hook-ins with economy and government, that's direct links. where there might not be such direct links with people in government or people with economy. There's a separation between people and those things, which really asks the third thing, which is social spheres. How are these new politics, how these new regulations, how these new relationships between politics and economics going to truly affect or be affected by social spheres? And in what scale are those spheres going to have real effect? Is it going to be a local to global type motion? Is it going to be people getting together and actually demanding of their national government, things directly? Are we going to go hop over state governments or local governments directly to that scale to demand real change? And unfortunately, as of right now, we haven't seen that. We see more confusion about what's currently going on or where even people fit into it. People argue and complain about joblessness and job rates, and but they don't understand how the fiat currency is related to governments. They don't understand how exchange rates going. They hear about the S&P and the Nasdaq going up and down in points, but no one knows what those points mean in terms of trade value and exchange and daily return on investments for all these publicly traded commodities. So people seem to be worrying about the wrong things, and that's very, very troubling.
Yeah, I mean, not only are they worried about the wrong things, they're also trying. They're attempting to solve problems. It's not that everyone is just aloof and we have this genius idea that we think we're right and everybody else is wrong, and nobody else wants to do anything about it. That's not it at all. It's that people too often are trying to solve problems inside the system, and these aren't problems that can be solved. And even if they are solved, it doesn't fix the system. So any wins end up canceling out, because the system is going to correct and make sure that the people that get money keep getting money, and those without go without. So it's the system that's broken, not the people in it. Or so we look at stepping outside the system to say, what do we want, need, and how do we deliver that? So I think I think the politics of it really confuses things, because people end up wanting to choose a leader or a person who can solve all their problems so that they don't have to solve them themselves. And it makes sense in terms of, if it worked, that's great, right? I mean, but over and over again, it just doesn't work, and we have proven. So because it's never great, right? It's always just good or better or worse or whatever, but it's never great. It's never what everybody wants. It's always concessions, and it doesn't have to be that way. I don't believe it has to be that way at all. And I believe that just with some simple reorganization, we can remove a lot of inefficiencies and take the pressure off a lot of people. And I think that a lot of times people they can't see, if you could see the problems out there, if you could see that somebody else is not eating before you went to buy that new iPhone, you might not buy that new iPhone. You might make sure somebody else can eat. And I think a lot of what we, at least in the West here, do is we hide that stuff. We hide it because it's not good for consumption, right? If we're moving money to feeding people instead of to consumption, I think there would be problems in the U.S.
Yeah, and absolutely. And like I said, it's one of those things where, you look at the price of a new iPhone 7, and, that is, in a homeless shelter, that might be a month or 2 months worth of, bedtime for them, or it could be them getting food in bed for a month. That's a huge impact on not just those people's lives, but also in the society, because you're setting a precedent that's saying, hey, I see real value in not this thing, but somebody. And when you start doing that, when you start shifting that paradigm, and that's something, moving to this next section of a new society, that's something that a new society has to understand, is that since the modern era, into the postmodern era, the capitalism has done a great job of abstracting people, of quantifying them, of making them into a number or a thing or something that is easily handled by marginalization or an easily statistical shift in what is valid, what's invalid. And governments have, for the most part, adopted that same paradigm, that people, if you look at the U.S. Census, or you look at how people are quantified in terms of illnesses or food or whatever, people are inside these models are numbers. There are things that if it's a qualitative factor that they can't put a number to, then it just becomes another factor. It doesn't become something that's significant inside that model because it can't be quantified. If you can't quantify it, then you can't attach a money value to it. And if you can't attach a money value to it, then most people just don't know how to handle it, period. So it gets eschewed to this ether that surrounds this paradigm of capitalism for society. And it's not just the abstraction. It's not just the idea of people being marginalized based on that. It's the idea of that people have, any person has a different ability to affect these things at different scales by doing the same thing or different things at those scales. So, let's say you're at your personal scale. What can you do? Yeah, I mean, you pointed out exactly what you need to do. You have this, this fetish item, this, toy that you don't need. It's an iPhone 7, but you've already bought like 3 iPhones before it that still function perfectly well on a phone network. I mean, most people need it for phone, text, and internet, which all of those phones do. I mean, they might not be as fast or as flashy or as big a screen, but they still do the job. So why buy a new one when you can help invest in something else? Maybe you invest in a retirement fund. $700 can actually give you a good return on investment in the long run. Or why don't you invest in your time? Get education, buy a class online, or invest in your community. Go to a food shelter, buy clothes for a homeless person, help with a reconstruction project. Those are things where the person is as much constructed by their social space as their social space is constructed by them. Every person has a social group. They have people they talk to. They have people to interact with, and that's very much how they construct the reality. We go from the very first question. What is conceivable? Well, that's very much in large based on what is perceived by the person and the social circle, and how they're living inside that space, and ultimately that affects that conception. That reality, both economically, politically, and socially. All those things are affected by those interactions, by those relationships. And those are very diverse, very complex relationships, whether it's a one-to-one, a peer-to-peer exchange, or whether it's a value exchange across a spectrum of people. And that's where, these communities of interest kind of come into play. Everybody, even within social groups, there's circles within those groups of people that have different communities, different interests. And that's very critical leverage in terms of getting your power back. It's like, as soon as you start getting people together talking about the same things, both in terms of your personal space experience, your lived experience, and the social space, the perception of that in society in terms of economics and politics, then you start asking the questions about how exactly how exactly someone can hack capitalism, how they can interact with the government, how they can demand certain things, how they can use their real value in terms of time and what they're doing with it to make real change that they will ultimately benefit from in the long run. And to think that one person can change the world it's at this point very hard to believe that you can do that. But if enough people do it at a local scale and they start talking to each other and start understanding how these things work, then yeah, real change can occur. But once again, going back to your original things, what do you want? What do you need? What are you willing and able to do? A society has to ask that question. They have to ask it not just once and then go forward. They have to constantly go, it's not a straight line, it's a circle. They have to constantly come back to that question because the society is changing constantly every day, every minute of the day. It's always a reprioritization of responsibilities based on the representations they're interacting with. So it becomes critical at that point to ask, the key thing about the society, which is essentially the most important part of this, it's not the politics or the economy, it's what people want to do with each other and their time. And unless you can crack that nut, I mean, we can't really have big hopes about either the economic or the political sphere.
Yeah, there is no economics, there is no politics without people. So society is, we have to start over. We have to reinvent it. We have to learn from what we've done. Absolutely.
Yeah. And like I said, it's not one of those things where we want to fearmonger or say we need to change now. Both you and I and a lot of people that have listened to this and a lot of people we've talked to, drastic change is very dangerous. If you try to take away their fiat, you try to take away their credit and try to give them a new system, people will freak out. There will be repercussions. We've seen with Zimbabwe's hyperinflation We've seen with balkanization during the 90s. We've seen what happens to a region when they're economically collapsed, where their fiat becomes worthless, when it becomes hyperinflated. They have no other commodity to exchange aside from what they currently have in their hands. And then you have a region that's in turmoil for the better part of a decade and to this date has not recovered. So what happens if you try to do that in one of the biggest economies in the world? I mean, that's an extremely dangerous concept and something to play with, which is why we're not talking about something that's revolutionary. We're not talking about something that's anarchistic. We're talking about something that is a hack, something that people can do on their personal and their social spaces and on those scales to move towards something in a new system of value exchange or whatever you want, a new economy, a new politic, a new society, in a way that is quiet and
evolutionary. It's evolutionary. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, just small things at a time, and that's what we're really promoting. And we're not promoting something that's going to be damaging or be feared by people. We need something that's pragmatic. We need something that anybody, no matter where they are in the world, can apply. And say, yeah, we have actually moved away from this exploitative system towards something that helps us benefit from our own investment of time and helps our groups and our societies, our families, whatever, benefit from what we do.
Definitely. So I guess are we wrapping up a new society? Head into the new world order is chaos?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes into the scales. I think the big takeaway is understanding the impact that you can have if you're listening to this, if you're reading this in the future. It's understand that you as an individual can do a lot, mm-hmm. but you need to have stuff in place. You need to get educated. You need to get talking with other people. You need to start discussing these things, creating a dialogue, and kind of avoiding the flip side of that, which is obviously direct conflict. There's a lot of discussions that devolve into direct conflict over things that seem very simple. We just had a presidential debate here in the U.S., the first presidential debate, and I don't know if anybody listened to it from the U.S. side, but there was not a lot talked about that was actually helpful to anybody in the constituency that they're trying to run for. So once again, people need to start asking questions of exactly what's going on around them, because if I can see it just looking at it plain as day, everybody else should be able to see it too. And if they don't, then that's an onus on me, a responsibility for myself to actually promote those ideas, which is what this is about, but also to go out there and talk to people and say, hey, what are you perceiving? How can we both make this better? And just take those small little steps. I mean, that's all it takes, is just engaging someone and talking to them. In the U.S., in our society in the U.S. specifically, it's always taboo to talk about politics or religion. And those are two of the biggest things that people should be talking about, but we're not.
Yeah.
And Europe is much better about this, but there are other parts of the world where talking about that stuff can get you thrown in jail or worse.
Yeah.
So obviously, us doing this project, we're very sensitive to those parts of the world that have those kind of very restrictive things, which goes back to the initial points of what is allowed, what's available. Because we don't want someone in those countries to do something drastic and then get thrown in jail or worse. We want you to be safe in doing these things that they start out small, but then they landslide. They snowball downhill and they create bigger effects down the stream. I mean, I don't know about you, Todd, but I mean, I don't expect to see much out of this in my generation. I plan on busting my butt to make sure stuff happens and make sure that I continue to promote and develop my ideas towards making these things work. But I understand that, especially in the political space, governments are very slow. They're big and they're slow. Economies that they want to be small and fast, but the more wealth that you generate and accumulate, the slower you become. So you also become resistant to change in that terms as well. So knocking over these buildings, these big edifices, these huge monoliths of economic and political power, that's it's dangerous to do it, for one, really quickly, and it's also very unlikely that I'll be able to do it quickly in terms of my personal perception of time and space. So it's one of those things where it's a long game. It's it's not just the short tactical game on the chessboard. It's a long game moving forward together with everybody.
Yeah, I think it's a long game. I think we're going to see though fast changes and quickly, and not too far out into the future. It's I don't think we're going to reach an end immediately, where everything's just utopia. But I think that the world's going to look completely different in a short period of time. And, I think people can make change in ways, in simple ways, like just where they're putting their time, where they're putting their money. If you're doing those things in with hacking capitalism in your mind, and you're choosing solutions that are owned by the people instead of by some corporation, then I think as soon as you turn the money flow into a different direction, there's no more that nutritious source of of capital that these companies love to ingest is gone, and they don't have the choice to get it back at some point. So I think you're right, Joe, with that it's definitely a long game, and we're not trying to sprint to the solution here. We're also not trying to dial back what we think is right just because we don't think people are ready to hear it. We want that discussion to take place.
Yeah, and we're essentially with this project, we're presenting a framework anyhow.
Right.
So anybody around the world can take it and say, okay, we can do this part and this part. But this part is either still taboo or it's illegal or whatever. We have to wait for that to change. But these things we can do now to make that change. So it's not, the progression of this book in this project are not a linear progression. These are things that are modules that you can take and say, okay, well, if we do one, it will affect all the others, and vice versa. It's just a matter of displacement in time.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's just we're not solving an easy problem. We're just approaching it a way that makes the problem solvable. And I think that's the key. And the other thing I think we do that's right, Joe, is it's open and transparent. And I think that society is going to demand that sooner than later, and in ways that it's not the Open Information Act I'm talking about. I'm talking about true transparency, so that if you're running a corporation that's owned by the people, anybody should be able to jump in there and say, how much are you paying for pens? Because we can provide you with cheaper pens and same quality, and then all of a sudden you're saving money. Then that savings being passed along to the people. So, I think the corporations like to say that that's their intellectual property, that's their trade secrets, and that's what gives them the edge. And it's all part of the ruse. So I think I think that can be easily seen when something is implemented that shows people that transparency and openness works.
Well, when you think about it, it's not really their IP or their trade secrets. It's the people's trade secrets and IP that they've just taken away in terms of legal frameworks and regulations that they can leverage from the political side to benefit them on the economic side. And that's a travesty with a lot of stuff that I've encountered with my personal experience, is this idea of essentially robbery of mental property, mental stuff that should be helping society, but is only helping a small group of society. And I think it segues great into this next section, which is the New World Order's chaos. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if this is like the post 1991 collapse of Soviet Union, from that unipolar point in which the economies of the U.S. and the Western world became the global economy, this neoliberal form of capitalism.
When capitalism won.
Well, one is
exactly.
like I don't remember winning anything when it happened. I just remember being a lot of smoke and mirrors on TV, and that was it. Some people broke down a wall. I think that's it. But you bring some really good points. You bring up good objects here, which are attempting to order the world based on what they want. And that's it is a desire. This motive for profit is a desire. It's not a necessity.
Yeah, it's even more of a sickness. I mean, really, when you look at what it does to people and how it impacts society, and to want more and more and more of something that's not good, I don't know, it's a sickness.
Yeah, and even in a world with 7.4 billion people, which is a huge number, if we just approach that one aspect of capitalism differently, the idea of profit, everybody could live comfortably around the world. They could all live comfortably if we just change that one aspect of it. But it is a sickness. People, once like I said, they equate happiness with more stuff. and they can't define either happiness or more stuff. That's the sad part, is that they just have these two nebulous ideas. They're simulations, they're simulacra. These ideas that don't have any real basis. They're all subjective, and they're momentary. They're not even persistent. They're very fleeting ideas, and they stop when they get what they want. Well, in terms of neoliberal capitalism and globalization, they never have enough, and that's what they want. They want enough, but they can never get it. Yeah. So they keep on accumulating stuff to get, this idea of that they have it all, but there's never an all. Capitalism is unsustainably growing. Capitalism has no ends. It just has to keep on growing, otherwise it dies. Yeah. And they don't attempt to solve any of the problems. Their ideas of solving problems is shifting really bad stuff to places that can't fight against it. Detroit in the U.S. is a great example of that. In looking at China and looking at their industrialization, we shifted away our political problems of labor organization in the U.S. and we shifted that to China. We shifted a collapse in our automotive industry. We shifted that problem away, like in terms of social news coverage, but also the political power that region had. It used to be the industrial steel belt, now it's the Rust Belt. Detroit has massive political problems. They have very little. I mean, I think someone told me that they're having a kind of a renaissance in terms of their localized economies and small businesses. But it's only small businesses. There's still no major economic investment going in there. The only thing that is of value there is real estate, which has been traded and retraded time and time again. But no one in that local economy sees any effect of that. So it's really just the same old game of them displacing crisis into those areas that can't fight against it, and then having that being a dumping ground for their problems. And because of globalization, the world has shrank in terms of that perception. But also the idea that they have a place that can't be touched where they can displace that crisis is also shrinking. Those places of displacement are going away relatively quickly because they're using them all up. So in terms of pollution or economic failures or political failures, we've done a really good job of connecting the world, so to speak. But those connections still have real distances so they don't use the locations, is what I'm saying. They don't use those locations anymore. They use the connective tissue between the locations to displace now. And I think that's a major thing to understand, is that they use the process of capitalism to actually displace crisis persistently with the illusion that it is actually healing itself, when in fact it's just progressively getting worse. Yeah. So I mean, your chapter, your title here of the New World Order's chaos is spot on. I mean, chaos is, to us, has become normalcy, which is insane.
It is, man. What else can we do but what we're doing? Like you said, it's the idea that they're never trying to solve our problems. They're trying to profit. So they're trying to solve our problems when there's profit. But when there's not profit, they're not trying to solve that problem anymore. No. And I don't know if people don't understand that. I think, I get not knowing where to go from there, but you have to understand that. I mean, you have to get that their best interest is not you. They're going to lay you off as soon as it makes sense to their bottom line. They're going to get rid of you as a customer. They're going to not use proper ingredients and things and hope that there's not a big recall. It's all numbers to them. They're nothing to do with people whatsoever. In that people, they just want their attention. They want their they want their attention. We say money, but it's you're just buying and selling your futures.
Yeah, they want their time, and they want them to consume stuff. Yeah. And that's about it. And in the worst case, they want people to go into debt because they can then use that debt against them. That's a negative time deficit for them.
Yeah, now they bought their future time.
Yeah, and it's just a further deepening of that robber baron type mentality. And like I said, that needs to go away. I mean, if we want to have any hope of having a new system that functions correctly, the idea of profit really has to be addressed. Because there can be an idea of profiting that's not exploitative, if that's not, there must be some balance where inside this new system where there's something that provides the incentive to do something. but is not exploitative in nature. There's got to be a new word for profit. So we need to shift away from profit to something like added value. It's got to be some kind of shift like that, because this level of chaos in terms of capitalism and what it does to people and their spaces, it just has to go away. You look at inner city problems, you look at education problems, and this is not just the U.S. This is globally. Different countries choose how and when to educate people at certain times about certain things. And a lot of the stuff, especially regarding capitalism, very few places around the world actually go into how capitalism functions. And if they do, it's kind of brushed over in large. And it should be one of the first things people learn about, because it's probably the most important thing that's affecting their entire lives from cradle to grave.
Yeah.
It's how you're being used and how you're going through the system and being pushed through all this machinery that surrounds you. You don't see it as machinery, but that's what capitalism has made of it. It's you're going through this machinery that is your life, being pushed around by, oh, you're a certain age, you need to get married and have kids. You're a certain age, you need to buy a house. You need to go into debt to do this stuff. You need to spend money to make money. Blah blah blah. It's all these old cliches, these old things. You're just a widget going through a factory that's eventually going to get off that line,
Yeah.
and who knows where you're going to go at that point.
Yeah.
But you can shoot.
When you're broken, they dispose of you, right?
Yeah. And on the other side with that metaphor, it's also very dangerous for you to jump off in the middle of that machinery and throw something into the gears. Stuff can blow up and stuff gets very dangerous at that point. So how do we just modify the manufacturing line en route to make sure that when you get to the end of the line, oh, there's something else for me to go to? Or there's little bypasses where I can go off and choose to do something else. There has to be a better conceptualization for people to make it, more palpable. And I think this might be this project that we're doing right now. This might be the project that actually makes it understandable, easy for people to consume, and ultimately something they can use to empower themselves. Because if we want a new world open that is order, and we want to have this idea of transparency and consensus and governance that's egalitarian, that's something that they can have their privacy, but also protect their public worth, their value, in not just their personal spaces, but at a global scale. If they can have that direct effect on someone half around the world and do it in an efficient way that's non-detrimental to that person or themselves. And the idea of people taking control and executing their own solutions, it's absolutely important. But we also have to understand that a lot of people don't have the critical facility to do that. Once again, we've talked about education and pretty much every section of this project we've talked about so far. We've talked about the actual absolute critical importance of becoming educated and learning how to think about these things and looking at the system. Because when we're talking about hacking capitalism, you have to understand how the system works in order to hack it. You have to be able to break it apart first in a safe manner, and then look at the mechanisms to decide exactly how we're going to change this for the better. And we're talking about the collective better, the social better, the global better. I think we get a new order. Or a set of orders. A hierarchy or a distributed, decentralized idea of order. Because what we're doing now with this, very chaotic system that we live in, is that we see the chaos as order, which is just bonkers. And that is not normal. That's not a natural state. If I can say natural state, it's not a natural state for me.
Yeah.
It's when I took a step back and I left about what I'm doing in my life, I was like, oh crap, I need to reassess everything. And it's there are very simple things in terms of transparency and openness, and just getting these things out and about and talking to them in a very non-aggressive but very serious manner about how, if we want a new system that actually functions, people need to take responsibility. They need to understand what they're taking responsibility of, and ultimately be able to action and use that responsibility for a certain scale of effect. I think from that aspect, a person can get a new order. They can get some kind of order that is not just functional and strategically functional, but is ultimately globally beneficial.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because I think people do even today find order as long as they either succeed within capitalism or exit altogether. And there's plenty of people living off the grid, and they don't see any of it, and obviously it affects them, right? The air quality affects them, the water quality affects them, but ultimately you can, at least now, until things are too far messed up for anybody to escape what we've done to ourselves. For now, it is somewhat escapable, but it's like playing the lottery at that point. I
Yeah.
mean, it's hard to do. It's hard to win the game because
Mhm.
it's not. There's too much chance involved there, and it's hard to escape because you have to understand that capitalism and the things we do are problems that
Mhm.
can't be solved within the system. So therefore, you take yourself outside the system and live your life there because you've realized and you know better. And I think either one of those, it's not easy. It's not easy to
Mhm.
find that path. And I think more and more people are finding those paths. And I think something like this is just going to accelerate that process.
Yeah, and like I said, it's so critical to understand that this this project is not going to like just be a manual for like how to do something like from start to finish. This is something. It's a collection of modular ideas in and of themselves that actually create a cohesive whole. That actually start a new conceptualization of a process that can work and is functional, and not just theoretically but practically. Because I've been applying even the stuff we haven't talked about yet, that we're going to get to. These are things that a year ago, a year, 2 years ago, I started researching and looking at, and I was like, yeah, these things can work, and I can use these in my life to do something better, and it has gotten better. So, I mean, economically and in terms of political engagement and social engagement, I've made huge leaps from 2 years ago when I first started looking at aspects of this project. And I mean, we just started this project maybe a year ago, or talking about it about a year ago. But the reason I got attracted to this project was that everything that we're talking about here is stuff that I've done personally. And once again, I understand that I'm doing this from a very privileged standpoint. I'm a white male in the U.S. I have leeway that very few people in the world have. And there's gender issues. There's race issues. There are things that are huge barriers that are still very much in place that affect your ability to leverage these things. But within a certain scale, you can absolutely do it. I mean, there are things that you can do with the resources that you have, and with some level of conception, you can actually build a better economic, political, social system for yourself. And that new system, I'm telling you, you will be the person that people go to look for those solutions. And no matter where you are in the world, people will look to you and say, okay, this person has done stuff. They know how to do that. They've had a proof process. How do we scale this for everybody? And that there are numerous examples of that all around the world. People that either find ways to leverage what limited resources they have to grow out crops or to restart agricultural processes, or even people that in urban areas that have started new agricultural processes or new social processes, or new humanitarian processes. People around the world are very resourceful, very creative. That's one of our best traits. And I think with this project, we're asking you to just use that same creative spirit that everybody has and look at one of the bigger things in your life that's affecting you, which is the economic systems that are essentially globally connective, and how can you start breaking those things apart for a better place for yourself.
Absolutely, sounds like a better world to live in.
I hope so. Yeah, that's kind of the goal.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean that's how that's how we at least think that we can get order, and I think that's something that I'm a fan of chaos, but at least call chaos what it is. Like
Yeah,
Joe's saying, when you think it's normal and it's chaos, then we've got problems because we're operating under a completely different set of assumptions, and
yeah,
that's just going to end up drawing. We're going to draw different conclusions with the same set of logic on something like that. So
yeah.
we want to definitely get back to order,
Mhm.
and I think that's what this project's all about.
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, I don't think a natural order is going to be the same thing it was back before. We've been dealing with capitalism, at least this form, for a long time. Hundreds of years we've been dealing with this form of exploitation, this conceptualization that's just got more aggressive over time. So what is the natural order that we'll be going back to? Who knows? I mean, I think that's a big question on everybody's mind. And there's a lot of people that have written a lot of good books on it and a lot of good literature on it. But I think it's all conjecture at this point. It's all rhetorical. It's really, people have to write the literature. It's not just a collective of people that either have education or have access to knowledge. It's people at all scales are going to have to write their own books, write their own histories, start sharing that with other people. I mean, I can't tell you how critical it is, because that knowledge power that gets created by that generation, that's more powerful than any government out there. People just get together and start sharing that knowledge. Oh man, that's
what works.
That's
what
impact.
What works, what doesn't. How does that affect people? How does it work for you and not work for me? And talking those things through, because at that point, that's what corporations don't do. They don't sit across the table from each other and share experiences in order to better themselves. That's what people do. People do that within the organization, but we don't do that outside the organization, because, well, you get terminated, right?
Yeah.
So, and nothing's more important than a job. So, so I guess, I don't know, Joe, that's all I've really got for today. If you want to anything up.
No, I think with the new system, like I said, we purposely kept it vague just because this is going to be something that's very, very personal, very subjective, very locally applicative. And that's why we always ask at the end of this thing, if you see this, if you hear about it, please contribute, please write us, add comments to the book. Let us know exactly how your local experiences are affected currently by the current system, but also how you see things in this book being effective or being useful. And let us know if we're missing something. Let us know, please, because it's super critical that your perspectives be included in this, because this is not just two people's effort. This is a global effort. This book is a global book. It's a community book. Anybody can contribute. So please let us know how these ideas might be useful to you.
Definitely. Joe, I think that's it. I guess episode 7 is in the books, and we will see you next time in episode 8.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, man. Yeah, thanks.
Joe. Appreciate it.